Welcome to the second set of notes on medieval Europe. This lecture covers the second half of this time period, basically covering the time of feudalism. We are still in the same place, so geography and technology haven't changed much. Government sure has though, as we'll see. Mr. Roughton tells me there's lots of videos in this one, so hopefully I won't have to do too much. The title of this section is The Late Middle Ages. If you ask me, that's kind of stupid. Wouldn't the Late Middle Ages just be the end ages? I would have called it the end of feudalism personally. But what do I know? I'm just a professor doing what Mr. Roughton tells me. And here we go. Pretty much this whole section is on government, so I guess it makes sense to start here. Remember, feudalism has spread over Europe, so now there are a bunch of kings ruling each little area. We're pretty much back to this. Charlemagne, remember, reunited some of the kingdoms, and various other kings did at different times as well. None have really stuck though. After the Viking raids, things broke back down into this mess, and feudalism didn't help it. It actually made the split even more solid. With the arrival of feudalism and personal armies, Europe turned into one big struggle for power. I mean, shoot, if I was a king with my own army, I'd tell them to go around conquering stuff too. Wouldn't you? Remember, there was no single ruler in charge of Europe. There wasn't anyone to step in and settle arguments, so the armies had to do it. These landowners and rulers pretty much all wanted more power, and they honestly didn't care how they got it. There was, however, one man in charge of the church, known as the Pope. As we talked about last time, the church was very important at this time. Still, the Pope was not, at this time at least, considered a military leader, so even his power was limited. Time for a quick time out. In just a second you'll see a picture of Charlemagne being given a crown by the Pope. Remember, Charlemagne was one of Europe's best kings. When you see the picture, who seems to be in charge? Charlemagne, who is getting the crown, or the Pope, who is giving it? Who seems to be running the show? What in the picture gives you that idea? This really is important, so think carefully. So, here's the picture. Charlemagne is the one kneeling in the blue robe. The Pope is the one standing in the golden robe. Also notice the background, to get an idea of where this is happening. So, what do you think? Who has the power here? Most people see the Pope as having power, because Charlemagne is bowing to him. Also, the Pope is wearing gold, which is typically the color of kings. But there is one other major thing, as we'll see in a minute. This picture represents the beginning of a serious struggle for power between the kings of Europe and the popes. This battle continued back and forth for hundreds of years, and to some degree continues even today. We're going to look specifically at three sets of kings and popes. The problem with Charlemagne and Pope Leo, who was the Pope at the time, was that both felt they should lead Christendom. Christendom was the word given for the Christian nation. Charlemagne built it using his army he felt he should lead. The Pope led the church, so he felt he should lead. Leo outsmarted Charlemagne by offering him the emperor's crown. Charles thought that he had won, and would now be the ruler. However, by giving him the crown, that meant that Leo had the power to also take it back any time he wanted. As you saw in the picture before, he who gives the crown controls the power. It still wasn't fully clear who was in charge, but it did appear that the Pope had more power. The second argument we'll talk about is the one between King Henry and Pope Gregory. This one got a bit nastier than the one we just talked about. It sure does make for a great story though. It all started after Charlemagne died. His empire was split up into three parts, with each of his sons ruling one. So, Europe was split up again, but with somewhat larger kingdoms this time. Eventually a man named Henry became king of the eastern part of the empire, which we now call Germany. Henry, like all kings, wanted more power for himself. The Pope at the time was Pope Gregory. He, like all popes, ruled from Rome. These two got into an argument over who has the right to choose bishops in Germany. Henry says it is his kingdom, so he should do it. Gregory says it is his church, so he should do it. Ultimately this was about money. Both men wanted to collect money from those who wanted to be bishops. Basically, they wanted bribes. Henry got so angry that he sent a letter demanding the Pope step down and saying he'd no longer support him. You should read the letter above. It was serious. Henry stated that God had chosen him as king, and he called the Pope a false monk, basically calling him a liar. Henry demanded that the Pope quit, and then basically said that Gregory would be sent to hell. Wow. Well, you can probably guess how the Pope felt about this letter. Gregory excommunicated Henry, and announced that he would no longer be recognized as king. The people of Germany chose to follow the Pope's command, and ignored their king. Remember, the Pope controlled the church and the church controlled heaven and hell. Nobody wanted to mess with them. The people of Germany rebelled against Henry, and he realized he had made a huge mistake. He decided to show he was sorry, by walking to Rome in rags like a poor beggar. When he arrived it was snowing. He walked to the door, and asked the Pope to let him in. The Pope refused. Henry remained outside barefoot in the snow, to show how sorry he was. He asked again the second day, and was again denied. On the third day, when he asked the Pope let him in, he made it clear to Henry that the Pope led Europe, not the kings. Henry agreed and never challenged the Pope again. He was then reinstated as king. Here's all the key points for that story, just to make sure you got them all. I'm going to take a break after that crazy story. I'll be back in a sec. The last king we're going to talk about is King John. This is the same King John from Robin Hood, if you have ever seen that movie. If you haven't, you should. That talking fox is awesome. The main problem with the kings is that the longer they were in power the more ruthless they became. They had the army backing them up and truly believed God had chosen them, so they became arrogant. None were more arrogant than John. If I ever saw him, I'd be like, oh no, please don't hurt me, super king dude. John's biggest mistake was forcing the church in his kingdom to pay taxes. The church said they wouldn't do it. He said they must. So the church said, fine dude, we're leaving then. With no priests around, the people of England were sure they would be sent to hell. This was bad news for King John. John's problems truly began when a group of nobles in England demanded that he change his ways. They, however, wouldn't just take his word for it. They created a document called the Magna Carta that John would have to sign. These nobles told John that, if he didn't sign it, they would leave England too. And they wouldn't just leave themselves, they would take their knights with them. They were angry at John for many reasons beyond his argument with the church. For example, he was arresting people for no particular reason, if he felt they might challenge him at some point. So, they said, you either agree to this list of demands or you will lose all of your support. This was an incredible thing in history. It was the people rising up against an unfair king. Here are some of things that were in the Magna Carta. First, the main statement of the Magna Carta is I, King John, accept that I have to govern according to the law. This would mean that the king was equal to his people, not above them. It would mean that the law was the true authority in the land. No king in Europe had admitted this before. The 5 major parts things were not to put nobles in jail without a trial, to have fair taxes for the nobles, to let freemen travel wherever, to stay out of church business, and not to take stuff from people without paying. Notice that these rights were mostly for the nobles. The Magna Carta wasn't written for peasants. So, do you think John signed? He absolutely did. Of course, he ignored it and didn't do most of things he said he would. Still, it was a huge moment in world history.